Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. My name is Phil and joining me as usual I've got Rohan. Hey Rohan.
Hey.
And joining me today, another fellow Aussie, we've got Tony. Hey Tony.
Hello everyone.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Navicasa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. The configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
So Tony, you're from Queensland.
That's correct.
Yeah, nice. A few Queenslanders have come on the podcast, so yeah, a lot of home automation enthusiasts up there.
Yeah, I think so. We get a fair bit of response back on the various forums I'm a member of, and I'm surprised how many people are from Queensland.
Well, thanks for taking the time to come on. We're going to pick your brains in a minute about your awesome setup as well. Yeah, but before we do, I think it's going to be a big episode today, Rohan, because, of course, it's October, which means Hacktoberfest has kicked off.
Yep, that means everybody's doing everything.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's live for 2019, and Home Assistant is, of course, participating. So the first 50,000 developers who register on hacktoberfest.digitalocean.com and make 5 pull requests before the end of October may be eligible to receive a free t-shirt. I know I'll be working to get my third t-shirt in a row, I think.
Nice.
For Home Assistant, you can contribute directly either through new components, or you can even help out by adding or improving the documentation on the Home Assistant website, because the Home Assistant website is all part of a GitHub repo. So if you have been struggling to find out ways to help Home Assistant, this month is a good way to give something back and get something in return for free.
Yeah, that's awesome. Also, something else that's happening is there's a State of the Union for 2019. So if we remember, we saw one of these earlier, and ING are once again hosting the Home Assistant State of the Union, which will be in Amsterdam on November 13th. So interestingly, I think within 24 hours, the event already reached capacity.
Yeah, I think they had like 100 seats or something.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully this will be recorded or live streamed somewhere. So that'll be neat.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, exactly. So as we said, Hacktoberfest is here. So Rohan, version 1.0. Right?
Almost, not quite, not quite.
No, so 0.100 has landed, and as we're aware, Paul has said previously on one of our episodes, they're not going to go 1.0, it's going to be 0.100. So here we are, 0.100, as they move towards that road of getting to version 1.0. And there's actually a lot of features in here that we can actually see moving over, getting closer and closer to a 1.0 release.
I was going to say, I still once in a while see people posting, 0.99 is here, therefore next one's going to be 1.0. It's not.
No,
sorry.
It's not it. So the first big feature for this release is around the Google Assistant for Navicasa subscribers. So you can now have your Home Assistant instant report states of your entities back through to the Google Assistant. So this means you can now use the Google Home app to create, I think they're called routines in Google Assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, if a light turns on in Home Assistant, that state can then be pushed up to the Google Assistant, and you may have Google Assistant then carry out some actions in the cloud for you. It's a similar feature that was added to the Amazon Echo a few releases ago. So yeah, that's cool to see Google Assistant getting that as well.
Also, DUDES imaging processing support. So DUDES, which basically stands for Dedicated Open Object Detection Service. So DUDES. It's right. It's designed to run as a Docker container, which lets you process images to detect objects. So stuff like people, furniture, similar to TensorFlow. We had a pretty in-depth episode about that a while ago now, actually.
Yeah.
So it works pretty similarly to that.
As a Docker user, I appreciate that this can be like containerized and run on a remote system that may be beefier than a Pi, right? So that's really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're an iZone climate user or using the custom component for iZone, that's now been moved to an official integration in Home Assistant. So you can scrap the custom component and put it in your configuration YAML file permanently. It is here to stay. So good work on everyone testing that.
Kaitera. So we support devices and sensors from a company called Kaitera. One of those devices seems to be called a laser egg. And why, I don't know. But basically, it's a Wi-Fi sensor that detects gases and chemicals in the air inside your house. So I think it's a cool name, laser egg. But
Right. It sounds like it's going to shoot something.
yeah, I definitely have a mental picture of what it is, and I don't think that actually corresponds to what the product actually does. So
I was thinking of your cat getting fried.
yeah, exactly.
For users of people interested in travel time information, there is now a new travel time component. It's called the Here Travel Time Sensor. And they're basically a freemium service, so you can get 250,000 transactions a month. It does require an API key. So think of this, you put in your coordinates, how long is it going to take me to get to work this morning? So as an alternative to the Waze travel time or the Google Maps travel time sensor. So if you prefer you don't want Google to know your information, maybe you're a bit, tinfoil about that. Here's another alternative product that you can use.
Yeah, well, it's good to see stuff that's not specifically around Google or whatever, right? So it's nice that that's just other services that have APIs around that too. So smart shades. So Soma, who's a smart shades manufacturer, they've released a Raspberry Pi controller image. So basically what that means is similar to how you can stick Haz.io on a Raspberry Pi, same way you can stick the controller for their smart shade software on a Raspberry Pi and use that as a control unit for Blind. So you don't need a separate hub or anything like that you have to go buy. If you have a Raspberry Pi sticking around, stick that in there and you can do that. So the integration talks to that controller directly. So then you can start controlling some of your Soma smart shades.
So I actually have the Soma smart shades, and I didn't buy their controller because they're actually selling their controller as an additional product.
Right.
And I remember when they were advertising it, it was literally just a Raspberry Pi in their custom case. And I was like, well, I'm not going to spend, $100 to buy a Raspberry Pi in a lockdown case.
Yeah.
So clearly they weren't selling. So now they're just giving away that image to the controller software for free, which is really cool. But since then, I actually have some Raspberry Pis deployed around the home. And I'm using a free GitHub library that's just a Soma to MQTT bridge, basically.
Okay.
It's worked out really well, yeah. So nice. If people don't want to, because I'm unsure if once you put this image on the Raspberry Pi, does that mean you can't, install anything else on the Pi? Like, are you locked out of it? So, if anyone's interested, ping me on Discord or something. I can send you or find it on GitHub. There's lots of Soma controls because it's all Bluetooth-based open APIs anyway.
Right. So was the the sensor that they were commercially selling, was that literally a Raspberry Pi with the software on it?
Like you could tell by the pictures on their website that it was the Raspberry Pi just in their case because it had the Ethernet port, the 4 USBs, the classic Raspberry Pi look, right? I looked at it like it didn't take me it took me less than a second to say that's a Raspberry Pi, right?
Yeah, you know what? To be honest, I don't know why more companies don't just do that, right? Like use devices that exist already. I understand why there is some value to building your own hardware around that. Yeah. But I mean, look at these guys are doing it, and who's the other Sonoff, right? They're just using standard ESP8266s and saying, "Hey, I'm going to stick my software on here." And what's cool is, I there's a downside to it from a vendor perspective as well, which is, you have stuff like Tasmota and stuff that comes out, which again, I don't know if they're a huge fan of, but I think it's kind of cool that I have the ability to do that at least, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There is a version of Sonoff where they openly happy for you to load custom firmware on it. But by default, though, most of these companies don't like it. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the never-ending game of cat and mouse between Arduino / ESP Home / Tasmota people having with the Tuya-based device, which are ESP8266. In fact, I just purchased just a cheap wall plug for $20 and the latest version of Tuya Convert, which runs on a Raspberry Pi, detected it and upgraded. So it now runs Tasmota.
Yeah, I think even just this week, I saw on the Reddit there was, people celebrating. Yes, it can 2U convert can now be used without wirelessly again. So it definitely is. It sounds like a good description, a cat and mouse game of trying to catch up.
Yeah, the problem that companies like 2U are having is because they're using a vanilla off-the-shelf Wi-Fi chip, and these things are bulletproof. They're excellent. Everybody else has software for it, and at the end of the day, you can crack them open and solder 4 wires and program Tasmota onto them manually. So I don't think it's a battle they're going to win anytime soon.
Another interesting ESP8266 device I found was the Sensibo Wi-Fi air conditioning controllers. I was just browsing what was connected to my Wi-Fi, and I couldn't work out. I could see ESP8266 or whatever it is in my ASUS router. I'm like, what is that? And the only thing I can work it out to be is the Sensibo controller. So I think there's a lot of commercial, products that are using, those sort of chipsets as well, which is good to see.
There's a couple of different ways people use the chipsets. Battery-operated stuff is generally just used as a modem. There's a secondary MCU that handles all the processing, and that runs at a much lower sleeping current than the 866, which is quite high.
That's interesting. Okay.
If you buy a 2U based door sensor, motion sensor, it'll have 2 MCUs, and the 8266 is merely a modem.
Huh.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do wish more people use that kind of standard hardware, right? But again, like I said, I get why they don't. Just because of, proprietary, you're doing whatever, and somebody's just flashing over whatever your value proposition is and making your product just generic, right? So I get it, but it is, you can do some cool stuff like this, right? Hey, DIY controllers and stuff. So
I get it as well, but the skeptic in me says it's one thing for the ma and pa users to buy a device and be happy using their cloud service, but the fact that these cloud services, even in China, cost money to run, and the more devices connected to it, the more infrastructure is required. So, the skeptic in me wants to know why are they expending so much energy trying to stop people from just taking their hardware and loading firmware on it, somebody else's firmware on it.
Yeah, and
even just this week, there was, I think it's maybe a German or Denmark or something like that. There was I can't pronounce it, but it's Churofner Nello, which is a smart doorbell. They are completely cloud-based, and they've actually gone insolvent. And they've announced this week that in 14 days, their cloud is going offline, and once that happens, their Nello smart doorbell will stop working for everyone. So there's definitely costs involved, and clearly, it's not as cheap as I think a lot of startups are thinking, oh yeah, we'll just make it cheap in the cloud, it's fine. But there are ongoing costs to running that, and if you're not shipping product or offering subscription services, then eventually those costs will eat into your business.
Yeah, and it depends on how heavy or light or whatever your service is, right? If you're typically the way you productize something would be that you're assuming you have a subscription cost, that your subscription costs more than what you're actually paying, right? And in times like this, I wish companies like this one would just open source their code. You're running out of business. Maybe their idea is to reuse that code in a proprietary way in another enterprise of their own, but to me, it's just open it up.
Exactly. If you're, you've got to have some thoughts about the people who have spent their hard-earned money to buy your product. Now you failed for whatever reason, at least give them a chance to continue to use it. This is not the first time this has happened. Logitech was doing it in the beginning of the year.
I think that was our first episode of the year, right, Phil? When we got back from hiatus, it was.
I think we were just basically reporting every episode. Something else is closed down, but unfortunately, it won't be the last one. I'm sure there'll be always another one that's going to shut down.
Yeah. But I digress.
So that's the Soma blind controllers. If you are lucky enough to have an IKEA, here we go, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Fitre blind. For those lucky enough to have those, they are now supported with the native trad-free integration in Home Assistant. So they'll just come up as a cover if you have one of those. Really cool. I really like the sleekness of the IKEA blinds. So I can't wait for them to launch in Australia.
So some breaking changes. There's a few this release. So here's a couple of the highlights, but make sure you go through the release notes to actually figure out what's actually broken. So the deprecated integrations have now been removed. So if you remember in episode 55, we talked about components that use web scraping as a methodology to, get some information. So components like UPS and FedEx, those have been removed. So you probably could find them in the Home Assistant community stores still if you need them, but it's not a scalable way of building a component just because if somebody makes a change somewhere on their website, now everything is broken. I do agree with moving away from those kind of components. So all of those have been removed now.
But they are in that community store, which is a good place for them, I think.
Yep. Just use it at your own risk.
Exactly right. Rohan, I think this one might be that affects your use Ecobee. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So Ecobee climate devices will now be set up from the user interface. So once again, this is where things are looking forward to that version 1.0, where things are moving away from YAML and going back into the UI. So existing users like yourself, Rohan, you shouldn't have to change anything. Your settings will actually be sucked in from your YAML and just ready to go. Yeah. But as part of the change, any Ecobee specific services, such as Ecobee Resume Program, they're being moved away from the Climate platform, and they will instead be moved over to the Ecobee platform. So you'll now call Ecobee.Resume Program. So once again, you just have to go through and update any service calls as the usual story goes.
Yeah, which makes sense because the Climate should be more generic instead of specific to Ecobee. So, all right, well, that's good. Good thing I don't have to do any work around it for the first part, at least.
Yeah.
Transmission download client. So that's also moving to the UI. So if you use Transmission to download torrents and such, now that integration will be moved into the UI. So you don't need to do any YAML config, similar to what Phil talked about with the Ecobee. And if you've got your monitored conditions flag set today, so if you're using this integration and you've got the monitored condition flag set up, then you'll need to remove it. Basically, it'll suck in all of the sensors and switches that this creates.
And in other interesting updates, and on the same sort of path, Plex can now also be set up via the user interface. So previously you would have to get some tokens and all that via the config flow and all that. Now you can just go into the integrations menu. There's no breaking changes for the Plex though. So if you already have Plex integrated today, when you upgrade to 0.100, it should just keep working. So I think what we're taking away from 0.100 is a lot of things are moving over into that integrations menu. And I think this is the first time we're seeing non-device specific integrations moving over. So for example, Plex and Transmission, which are generally, software based. Previously it was, like your hardware devices like Hue and everything moving over to that integrations tab. But now we're actually starting to see a lot of, the cool stuff that, I think it's cool, not just hardware based, but the existing software based come into that integrations menu, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, that definitely is interesting. And again, as we move towards 1.0, that's something that has to happen, right? You can't have everybody going and editing YAML and things like that just because of varying levels of knowledge around how to do YAML, right? So the ZHA integration now supports sirens and warning devices. I think there's no real description required for that one, but that's pretty straightforward. But it's interesting. So if you have any Zigbee stuff around sirens, and I'm not exactly sure what counts as a warning device, but
I know, maybe like a CO2 sensor or a smoke sensor, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. So, yeah, because it does have an alarm, right? So I guess that makes sense. So if you've got those, then you're in luck.
And this is a pretty big update for people that rely on template sensors and switches. You can now define an availability template in those switches and sensors or even devices. So Home Assistant has a great way of being able to mark a device as unavailable. So, for example, if you're familiar with MQTT, if MQTT has an availability topic, and when a server or something goes offline, the last will message can go out and say, "All right, I'm offline." Instead of removing those switches or just making them unresponsive in the UI, Home Assistant will show them as offline or unavailable. This didn't really translate down to if you were defining your own template switch now, or anything in a template sensor, but now you have the ability to create your own availability template, and from there you can say, all right, if I'm getting a 404 response, for example, on this endpoint, or the response that I've just got is 404, mark the sensor as unavailable, and Home Assistant will just grey it out. So it's available for all template platforms, including lights, fans, covers, you name it. So a great little addition there.
Awesome. Google Home devices can now arm and disarm the alarm panels within Home Assistant. So you'll need to have a voice PIN set up just for security's sake. But yeah, you can now start talking to your Google Home to say, hey, not lock your door, but arm the alarm and disarm. And I especially for disarming, you got to be a big careful. You don't want to yell 1 2 3 4 if that's your pin. Also, don't make your pin 1 2 3 4. So you got to be cautious of kind of cognizant of who's around you as well, right? So
this is going to be great to enable like legacy alarm control panels that don't have voice enabled.
Yeah.
So if you've got like that very old school maybe a panel on the wall that has an integration with Home Assistant, but has no cloud connectivity or anything, you can now use Home Assistant to bridge it and make it voice enabled. So that's excellent.
Yeah.
All right, we're there 0-100. I think even next week's, because Hacktoberfest is going to kick off, it's going to be an even bigger release next week. But just quickly while I remember it, speaking of 0-100 and Home Assistant 1.0, Node-RED reached 1.0 status this week. So good on them.
I saw that.
Nice.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah. All right, Tony. Now we're going to quiz you about your very interesting setup. We've already heard some cool things that you've been doing, but I guess we'll just have to start off at the basics. This is Home Assistant podcast. This is the Home Assistant podcast. So how did you get started with Home Assistant, or how long have you been using Home Assistant for?
I've been using Home Assistant full-time for about 18 months. This is my second look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very happy with it. Probably the major push towards going to Home Assistant was when I decided to go away from Z-Wave light controllers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I was a little hesitant. Prior to Home Assistant, I was using HomeSeer, and it was very good with the Z-Wave devices. And my initial play with Home Assistant, I was on a Pi, and I just found it a little dodgy, I guess is the best way I could put it. But when I decided to go away from Z-Wave, it opened up Home Assistant again for me. Even though I'm a software developer, I don't know YAML from a yardstick, so it was a bit of a steep learning curve.
So you mentioned you started, you kind of used HomeSeer before Home Assistant. So what kind of caused you to move over from HomeSeer to Home Assistant?
Rohan, it was more a case of unhappiness with my initial Home Assistant Z-Wave play was what caused me to stay with HomeSeer. I owned a licensed copy of HomeSeer. It cost me nearly $1,000 Australian dollars.
Wow.
It's not cheap.
And more of the plugins were now becoming paid for rather than open source or anything like that.
Oh, interesting.
That's what pushed me away from HomeSeer. And I follow the Dr. Z's YouTube channel, and he just makes it look so easy. And when I realized that Hass.io could have Node-RED and JavaScript, I know. So I thought, bit the bullet and jumped in.
Awesome. Okay. That makes sense. So that's interesting. I didn't know that they were charging for components as well. So that's the new home tier was a paid product, right?
Yeah, so I believe the main product is paid for, and then you as a developer, so you and I, Rohan, could go out and create a plugin for HomeSeer and then sell it ourselves.
Yeah,
it's similar to like an app store from Apple.
Yeah. I guess that's interesting, because I always just assumed it was all kind of built in and whatever you pay. Because for me, it was the same thing. I did at some point look at HomeSeer, but it was pretty much right off the bat a non-starter. Because like you said, it was almost $1,000 or more than $1,000 at the time. And
they have a couple of different version levels, and I bought top of the line, so I got the tablet development software. I got everything. And there were a heap of good quality plugins, but over the years, they really started pushing the paid plugin route.
Right.
I think what's interesting is that you went from HomeSeer, which I think even today is considered, the gold standard when it comes to supporting Z-Wave devices. Then you went to something as open source as Home Assistant, which, being open source, and this isn't a dig at Home Assistant, it applies to anything that is uses based on open source, including OpenHAB and domotics and all that. The support for Z-Wave devices in open source is probably, at the bottom. So you've gone from, one of the top, Z-Wave device, software suppliers down to one of the bottom Z-Wave support. And obviously that'll get better in time. But I think part of your frustration with Z-Wave would be from going from that big jump. I'm guessing, because I still recommend Z-Wave, and I still use Z-Wave because I think it's, compared to Zigbee, it's much more reliable for me. What did you move over to? Like, if you've stopped using Z-Wave, what protocols have you moved over to?
Wi-Fi.
Okay.
I have 31 Wi-Fi controllers in my house. These are mains-powered light controllers. Most of them are from Shelly, the Shelly 1s and Shelly 2s, but I also have some, as I spoke before, some generic wall plugs and 3 Australian-approved dimmers that were Tuya-based but are now Tasmoda-based, and they're the only of my mains-powered Wi-Fi devices that are Tasmoda-based. I kept with the Shellys, I kept with their software. For a couple of reasons, they once they bought out MQTT, there was no reason for me to go to Tasmoda.
Right.
So for me, I've said this on the podcast many a time, and I still believe it today, I find that having a Wi-Fi device, sure, it's good at a consumer level, being able to ease of use to set it up and all that for, just getting on the Wi-Fi network. But the last thing I want is, my Netflix downloads being slow because I'm turning off a light switch or something like that. Do you find, and having so many devices now on your Wi-Fi spectrum, do you have any issues having that many devices communicating around your home?
Zero issues. Because it's basically telemetry data, if you're turning a light off, the tiny little packet of data wouldn't even drop 2 frames of Netflix. When you're using MQTT, which is TCP based, the TCP packet header is probably twice the size of the payload you're sending.
Right. And in terms of the sheer number of devices, I know I personally had, this standard run-of-the-mill ISP-provided router, and once I got to maybe 30 Wi-Fi devices around the home, that's it. Like, the network just shut down. I had to get a better router. Do you find that being an issue as well?
No, I've got a bit of a reputation for overdoing everything. I have, for you, Phil, it is a single-story, 270 square metre brick house with wooden frame and plasterboard. For you, Rohan, it's probably 2,800 square feet.
All right.
And I have 3 ubiquity access points.
Right. And that's what makes a difference when you have better coverage and things like that with multiple APs, right? So
that's right. And when you consider the my little Wi-Fi door sensors that I develop, when they do a Wi-Fi scan sitting on my desk, which is at one corner of the house, it can pick up all 3 of those access points.
Right.
I do think that a lot of the issues people have with Wi-Fi does come down to their equipment and their setup, and also because I'm using MQTT and not a cloud-based service, none of my data leaves the house, so that exponentially improves performance.
So in terms of so you're using MQTT. In terms of, like ease of setup, obviously, you have the knowledge and all that on how to set up MQTT and set up all those devices. Do you think, and I'm not talking like specifically just, us, like around the table here today, we can clearly handle this, but do you think big picture, smart home in the future for everyone, do you think, having to set up, MQTT brokers locally and all that for a smart home is viable for the run-of-the-mill house?
Yes and no. I think if you can't find it on Google or YouTube, you're really not trying. But I do think that for a lot of people, cloud-based services, even cloud-based MQTT services, could be used. It's you don't have to use MQTT. You don't have to use Docker or Pi. You can still do it all cloud-based, but I just don't, because I don't want stuff leaving my house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all my the 3 Tasmoda devices, technically there's 10 Tasmoda devices if you count wall plugs. I update them manually, but running the Shelly devices where they bring updates out every now and then. I also have a Ubiquiti router, which I have all my Wi-Fi devices running on their own VLAN, and that VLAN is prevented from going to the outside world. If I want a device to go to the outside world to get an update, I just unlock that VLAN, tell them all to update, and then relock the VLAN.
Okay, so you've got it, properly secured.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any such thing as properly secured, but if somebody wants to get in there, they're going to get in.
They'll find a way. Yeah.
Yeah. So what else? What else are you running? So you mentioned the Shellys. You're running a couple of things with Tasmoda. What else? What else do you got?
I've got, we spoke about before we started recording, I've got door sensors and remote controls, which are Wi-Fi based, but they don't connect to the network. They use the 802.11 management action frames, which are packets that Wi-Fi devices will pass around each other to just to advertise what's going on. For example, when you fire up your access point or your router, they will use these packets to see if there's anybody close by on channel 1.
Yeah.
And if it is, it'll then try channel 6, it'll then try channel 11, it'll then try channel 2. And that's how your Wi-Fi access points and routers know to select the best channel. So these packets don't require any authentication. They are unsecure, but it's up to the receiver. The receiver, which is just another ESP Wi-Fi chip, which is authenticated to the network. It does post-processing when it receives the packet to confirm that it's an allowable packet, and then it just gets... in my case, the packet contains an MQTT topic and an MQTT payload, and the receiver just throws it into the network.
Is there a restriction on the amount of data you can send over that protocol? Like, for example, could you send like an encryption key, or could you make all that data encrypted as a really long string and then decrypt it?
Yes, you are restricted to about 200 bytes per transmission, but you're not restricted in the number of transmissions you have. I'm currently redesigning my code that the receiver and the sensor will have rather than an encryption key, it'll have what's called a network identifier key, and it'll be hard programmed into both chips. And when the receiver receives the packet, the first thing it'll do is decode the data. The data has to be of the right format, and then it has to read this network identifier. And if it doesn't match, it just dumps the packet. Now, the management action frames can also be encrypted, as well as the chips can encrypt post and pre and post encrypt and decrypt the data. So there are ways to secure it, but you are still relying on the fact that if you even if you send a packet to a specific ESP chip, every ESP chip on that network is going to receive that packet.
Right. Okay. So it's sort of like just sending out a broadcast, and then he has to decide what data do I want to ignore and what do I want to focus on.
Exactly. In fact, you can rather than you have to in the sensor has to register the receiver's MAC address, but you can actually send it just all Fs, and it'll send it broadcast, and every device will process that incoming packet.
Okay. Interesting.
So. Other things I've do is I have a 8-zone ducted air conditioning system that is connected through both Node-RED and Home Assistant. Although I updated to the latest version of Home Assistant and it broke it, I can turn the AC off, but I can't turn it on.
Interesting.
Why would you want to turn it on?
Yeah, exactly. But the MQTT from Node-RED works fine to turn it on. So, yes, it's just something I need to look at. I have one lonely LifeX bulb, and it was bought for testing, but because I'd planned to, the golden grail of Wi-Fi controllers seems to be dimming and fan control. And with LifeX, you can buy actual downlights that already have dimming in them, although they're $90 a piece.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
To which I would need 10 to do my house.
Yep.
So I have one Zigbee device. It's a Yale door lock. It took me probably 12 months to weaken to go back to a protocol like Zigbee, but I have no intentions on. I am going to get another lock, but that'll be it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
I do. One of the questions that you always ask is about presence.
Yes, that's our favorite topic.
We love that question because everyone has a unique setup. Yeah.
Yeah. So I use Bluetooth beacons to do vehicle presence. So
okay, what sort of beacons?
I started off with the Estimote beacons, and this is early 2015. And they've worked flawlessly, but I have replaced it with some Bluetooth 5 beacons and a dedicated Bluetooth 5 receiver rather than trying to use a Pi or an ESP. This is a dedicated receiver, and they claim 200 meters range, which is rubbish, but it definitely, before my car hits my property, the lights are on and my door is unlocked.
Wow.
Okay.
So I'm guessing you must have some pretty robust automations in there so that for whatever. So let's say Home Assistant decides to restart at 3 a.m. and then it decides, okay, your car's just got home. It doesn't automatically unlock the door then.
No, that's correct. Yeah. And I have two automations in. I probably shouldn't say this being the home automation podcast and all, but I only have two automations in Home Assistant. One is to do backup and the other is to tell Node-RED that it's come alive.
Wait, so you mean you only have two automations set up in Home Assistant?
Yeah, sorry about that.
You know you're on the Home Assistant podcast, Tony. Like, we have an eligibility criteria. You could have told us that earlier. So I'm guessing you must do most of your stuff then in Node-RED.
Oh, you should see my Node-RED flows. They are ugly. They're attached. Lines and links, and I run everything in Docker. I have a little Asus embedded PC.
Yep.
And it runs Home Assistant, it runs Node-RED, and it runs Mosquito. But I couldn't get it to run Zigbee to MQTT.
Through Docker?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm running Zigbee to MQTT via Docker, no problem at all.
Yeah, but I have again with the overkill, I've got a Raspberry Pi 4 with 4 gig of RAM and 128 gigabyte SD card running Zigbee to MQTT.
Nice.
The Bluetooth stuff has been really reliable. We do have an issue with one of the cars which parks in the carport, every now and then it'll register as gone when it's not. But the new Bluetooth 5 beacons will solve that issue.
Mm-hmm. Do you do presence just based on the cars, or do you have any, do you use your phones or anything like that as a secondary presence? Like, what if you've got a car that's in for a service for a week? Does that mean the home will never know you're home?
At this stage, yes, but I am about to have Ubiquiti monitor my phone and the housemate's phone, so that when he's on days off and I go to work in the morning, it doesn't lock him out of the house.
Right.
It's instant. Once I've got it set to, so there's no in-home assistant. The binary sensor that I have for home or away for each car, there is no off per se. The beacon system just keeps sending, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. And then if Home Assistant doesn't receive it for X amount of time, it flags the vehicles as being away, and it does the appropriate action. Now, for the Estimode beacons, I've got it.
Right.
It sends the beacons send every 2 seconds. I've got it Home Assistant set to 2 minutes, and the outside vehicle does occasionally register a false away. With the new Bluetooth 5 beacons, I've got mine set to 15 seconds, and it's never registered a false away. So I pull out of the driveway of the morning, and by the time I get up to the roundabout up the road, the house is locked and all the lights in my bedroom have been turned off.
Okay, that's pretty good.
That's very reliable then.
Yeah, it is very good. Other automations I have are based around my little remote controls in the TV room. I've got one that I press when I'm going to bed, and it turns the lights on the kitchen, the hallway, and my bedroom. And then a couple of minutes later, the kitchen and hallway lights turn off. I've got one that's marked on the remote, need to pee. You can probably guess what that's for. It lights the way up to the bathroom, and then you head to the game and you come back and it turns all the lights off.
That's great.
So a couple of questions I've got for you guys, just for your thoughts.
Sure.
And a lot of it revolves around the Wi-Fi congestion issue. Do you think with more and more devices like iPhones and tablets going to 5 gigahertz, that it's going to start alleviate some of the issue with the 2.4 gigahertz congestion?
Well, yes. So 5 gig, I mean, by its nature, again, depends on how many access points you have, depends on what's all that kind of stuff. But 2.4 is pretty busy to start with, right? There's a ton of stuff that runs in 2.4. So Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, there's a lot of microwaves that leak at 2.4, just that kind of stuff, right? There's a lot of things that there's a lot more things that can interfere. 5.0 has its own interference challenges as well, but it's typically it's a lot less, right? And just with that higher bandwidth too, you can do some other interesting things, like a little faster, not faster, but theoretically faster. But also 5 gigahertz now means it's a less it travels a lot less. So meaning if you have a massive house, or if you're trying to do outside and all that stuff as well, you may have a little more range issues than with 2.4, right? And it's got worse penetration through walls and so on and so forth.
Now there's an advantage to that as well. There's less chance you're going to cop something from your neighbors.
Yep, exactly, right? So personally, I use a technology called band steering at home. So which is if your device supports both 2.4 and 5. And if it does connect on 2.4, it'll actually steer it towards 5 gigahertz, right? So I prefer most of my devices being on 5 gigahertz myself.
Yeah, pretty much our smartphones are the only things that are on 5 gigahertz here. I'm not sure I've got 2 Roku Premiers. I'm not sure what they're on. And I rushed into buying them, and I really disappointed that I didn't realise that they were Wi-Fi only. I'm It's amazing. I have 40 Wi-Fi devices, a great Wi-Fi network, and I hate Wi-Fi. Hate it with a passion. It's a necessary evil, but when I built the current house I'm in, I built it from scratch. And I had it built, I should say. Yeah. So when the house had the roof on and was at frame stage, a mate of mine come over and we went nuts with the Cat 6.
Yes.
I got 35 Category 6 enabled jacks in my house.
Wow.
So nothing beats wired as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
Are you utilizing all that Cat 6 or have you got spare runs that you can use in the future?
I'm only utilizing probably 10 of them, but they're there. I'd planned for the NBN, and so each bedroom has at least 2 jacks, one for a computer and one for a VoIP-enabled phone.
Yep.
The office has 10. My bedroom has 6. The media room has 7, and there's others spread around in the lounge room and in the kitchen. Although, with that being said, I did drop one recently because in the kitchen I had 2 jacks above the microwave, and I removed that wall plate and have one of the ubiquity access points is a wall-mounted or wall plate style access point. I wanted to talk about your last podcast with the gentleman building the tiny house. When I went Wi-Fi, I'm also part of the Shelley QA team. So they send us, we don't get paid or anything, but they send us pre-release products that we stress test and report any bugs.
Right.
Oh, that's cool.
And they've got quite a few low voltage stuff, 24 volt. So there's Shelley 1, which can be mains powered or it can be 24 volt DC. And the same with their, I believe they have an RGB dimmer that can run on low voltage.
So, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so are these products that they're currently testing, so not out on the market yet?
No, they're released. Well, the Shelley one's been out.
Nice.
Shelley one was the first thing they released in the lighting controller range.
Right.
Yeah, no, definitely they are released. This company is fairly quick to market with their stuff. They're developing more and more products all the time.
Sure.
So there's a couple of other things I wanted to discuss, and I think we've covered a bit of this, and I'm just wondering how much of a threat Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is to Zigbee and Z-Wave. I don't think it's much of a threat at this stage to Zigbee, but I think Z-Wave's days are numbered. I know you didn't want to hear that, Phil, but
I know, I don't. To say, like Z-Wave and Zigbee, I don't think Wi-Fi is much of a threat because don't forget recently Google was talking about bringing out, I think it was called Weave as another protocol because they've seen a need for a universal protocol that is not Wi-Fi based, that allows, small devices like IoT devices and sensors to communicate. And I think Wi-Fi's Achilles heel at the moment is battery devices. So you won't have any battery devices like a wireless temperature sensor or a door sensor because they consume so much power to have to connect to the network and for that network radio. That's where I think the strength of Z-Wave and Zigbee radios lie because they can be battery operated and not have to be touched for, months and years in some circumstances.
Yeah.
Bluetooth could take over the battery operated side of it. With that being said, the wall mounted 6-button sensor I showed you before, that got installed last September with a 500 milliamp LiFo battery, and it's still going strong. It's the only one I had assembled, so I had to pull it out to show you. I think the biggest problem with Wi-Fi for sensors is timing, is that it's fine for a temperature sensor or a water sensor, something where taking 3 to 5 seconds for it to connect to a network isn't really that important. But if you've got a door sensor,
or a motion sensor,
and you're halfway across the room before it registers, or even more interesting, if it's a door sensor and you've managed to open the door and close the door before it's registered the door open.
Mm-hmm.
That's another area where Wi-Fi struggles. But for mains powered stuff, I think Wi-Fi is a big threat.
Well, so the other side of this too is you got to look at the meshing as well, right? So whether it's how do you actually build a network that you're not used for. So there's two thoughts in my head. One is Wi-Fi is great for sending a bunch of data, right? When it's little short bursts of data. Again, nothing wrong with Wi-Fi, but I think Zigbee, Z-Wave are more kind of optimized for that. Just even protocol level, I think they're a lot more efficient in that sense. Whereas Wi-Fi is really meant for sending larger amounts of traffic. And on the other side of it too, from a mesh perspective, the one thing you got to worry about Wi-Fi is, well, you have to worry about it everywhere, but is your actual coverage holds and things like that. So, hey, do I have a slightly lacking? Actually, what's worse than having no coverage is having little coverage in a spot because it's just enough for you to connect, but maybe your device can't talk loud enough or whatever that is, right? And so in this case now, that's where something that meshes, so something that acts as a repeater as well every time, I think can add quite a bit of assistance, especially, again, you're not transferring files or anything like that through Zigbee, Z-Wave, those kind of protocols. You're just saying, hey, open, hey, close, which is typically a 1 or a 0 or something of that sort, right?
Yeah, but there's always more information than that. There's identifying information. But you're right. You're absolutely right. And the one thing where Z-Wave has the advantage over even Zigbee is that it's sub 1 gigahertz, so it's got greater penetration.
Yeah.
But talking about meshing, that was why I walked away from Z-Wave.
Interesting.
Once they started bringing out Gen 5 stuff with the tighter security, which is great, my Gen 1.0.0.0 devices had trouble. They would drop off. They wouldn't talk to each other. They'd constantly had to be repaired. I even went to the point of pulling out my old Vera original version device and set my version 1 devices up on their own Z-Wave network, and they work flawlessly.
Agreed. So you could I would argue that you could say the same thing about Wi-Fi as well as you go through different technologies. So, I mean, now we're on what they call Wi-Fi 6, which is the protocol level name is called 802.11ax. Before that, you had, we went through all these iterations: B, G, A, N, AC Wave 1, AC Wave 2, and then now AX, right? So, and yeah, a lot of it is reverse compatible, but not always, right? Or sometimes, like for example, if you have first gen Wi-Fi stuff, you again, just in the nature of what I do, best practice for Wi-Fi is to actually disable a lot of those lower data rates, which are part of B and so on. So there can be compatibility issues. I think maybe it's a matter of Zigbee and Z-Wave are evolving a lot faster, which is causing more of those issues. And to your point, maybe that's, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think there's just, again, it's an evolution. It's a faster evolution versus a less compatible standard, right? If that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. One question I would like to ask both the inventors, for want of a better term, of Z-Wave and Zigbee is, what would you do differently? And I would wonder if Z-Wave would continue at the sub-gigahertz level because of the frequency issues they're having with trying to sell products all over the world.
Yeah,
we can't use American devices because it's too close to some of our cell phone frequencies.
Interesting, yeah.
So I can remember back in 2010 or 2011 when your economy was tanking and ours was booming and we were getting $1.10 to your dollar. I could buy an American Z-Wave door sensor for $25, $30. The same thing here was $130. Now, they have come down in price, but nothing...
Yeah. Normalizes itself, right?
Yeah, nothing like your economy of scale.
Yeah.
A couple of things I want to start playing with is LoRaWAN for getting telemetry over great distances.
Yeah.
Yes.
And NB-IoT, the cellular IoT stuff. Now, I can find lots of devices here in Australia, but I can't find anyone that sells plans and can sign you up.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's going to have teeth for telemetry and different applications. We had a thing here a few years ago when they turned off 2G. Basically, the big telcos here just said, "Well, all our customers and all our cell phones are now off 2G. We'll just turn it off." And the amount of alarm systems that killed was phenomenal because everybody's still using 2G for.
Sure.
Yes, my alarm is enabled. No, my alarm is disabled, or somebody's cut the power cable. You better send somebody to have a look.
Yeah, because nobody really updates your alarm panels, things like that. Once it's in, right? For the most part, and then
exactly, it's like with the our wonderful NBN system here in Australia for our broadband network. They didn't take into account so many things when they designed it. One of them is taxi companies here in Australia at a pub or a restaurant will put in a free phone.
Yeah.
Now, the fight they have because the taxi company owns the service, but they have no ownership or access to the site. It's it's like me running a service at Phil's place.
Yeah.
One thing I would say about the Wi-Fi sort of protocols and stuff, and Rohan, maybe you'd know more being in Cisco. A lot of devices that we have for IoT now, are required on that 2G spectrum, but as Wi-Fi is sort of consumer grade, it's not really designed or thinking of smart homes in general. Mm-hmm. Do you see smart eventually, routers taking away that 2 gigahertz network and then, all these IoT devices are being left out in the cold because, technology's moved on and that 2G network is no longer supported?
No, I think one of the things is, so actually, if you look at the newer standards, they actually incorporate 2.4 back in.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but there's the bigger problem of people have a lot of legacy stuff and manufacturers want to cater to that. Even if you look, and one of my biggest issues is IoT devices today still use a ton of 2.4 gigahertz only radios. So the ESP8266 is a perfect example, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if they take it off, a lot of stuff will break. But I don't see, even if we were to go pure 5G everywhere, and I know there are wireless networks, I've talked to customers that run only 5G. But that does break a lot of stuff. So I don't see, at least in the home space, I don't see vendors doing that anytime soon. And the newer protocols are dictating that as well. So
right, okay, all right. Well, I think that is you have an amazing setup, Tony. So thank you for coming on, sharing your thoughts and your setup. I'm glad that you've come back to Home Assistant from Homesphere after giving Home Assistant another shot. And I don't want to see your Node-RED flows. As a software developer, I've never been able to get into Node-RED myself, so I can only imagine how messy it's going to be running everything through Node-RED. So good luck with that. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Cheers.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@haspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on haspodcast.io.